my name's Michaela and you're watching FunsizedStyle. Today's video I could not be more excited about because you guys know how passionate I am about education, about different health conditions that I deal with, and today's video is advocacy and education on steroids. Like, it is filled with so much knowledge. This video is definitely one of the longest on my channel, but I wanted this video to be a one-stop shop for all questions about hearing devices that I would get and have gotten since I've opened up about my hearing loss journey. When I first started talking about the possibility of receiving a bone-anchored hearing aid, I received so many questions from people asking if it was the same thing as a hearing aid, traditional hearing aid, if it was the same thing as a cochlear implant. I received questions from other people with osteogenesis imperfecta if this was a viable option for people with OI, and I realized how little education and knowledge there is about bone-anchored hearing aids specifically. So many people know about traditional hearing aids and cochlear implants, but nobody really knows about bone-anchored hearing aids, and so I have started with another avenue that I've used my channel to educate and raise awareness for. And as I've started talking about this, I talk a lot about it on my Instagram, and whenever I would talk about my device that I'm receiving from the brand Med-El, I've tagged them in my posts, and a few of the employees from Med-El have started seeing my post, and I've gotten the chance to connect with them and build a really great relationship with the people there, and they are seriously such incredible human beings and also a wealth of knowledge. I'm the one that's used to being interviewed, and I'm not the one usually interviewing other people, and this is something that I have wanted to bring to my channel for so long, ever since I started opening up about my hearing loss journey. But I only know the basics, and I only know my journey and why I'm receiving a bone-anchored hearing aid, but I don't know the ins and outs of the device. I'm not an expert. I am going to be using it, but I'm not an expert. I'm not an audiologist. I don't work for Med-El or another bone-anchored hearing aid company, so I don't know it all. I thought, now that I've built this relationship with this amazing company that will completely change my life, I thought, why don't I just throw it out there and ask them if I could put together some questions that you guys have asked me over and over and interview them. I was like, the least they could say is no. And I've never interviewed anyone before. This is my first time, and they said yes. And so we're here today to bring you an interview full of knowledge about mainly bone-anchored hearing aids, but also the difference between bone-anchored hearing aids, cochlear implants, and traditional hearing aids. And so I've come up with some really great questions, and you guys have asked some of these questions over and over. So whenever I receive questions about my device, I will instruct people to this video to have a one-stop shop full of knowledge to have all of your questions answered. So I wanted to make this intro as short as possible because this video is so long, but today I will be interviewing Corcoran and Kevin Vukovich from Med-El, and they are a wealth of knowledge. They are incredible human beings, and I'm so grateful for them to be willing to do this interview with me and trust me to conduct my first interview. So I hope you guys enjoy this, and let me know how I did, providing you all with such great knowledge that I hope will be helpful for at least one of you. If I can help one person, then that's all that matters to me. Med-El has also given me an email where you guys can send questions following this interview to them to ask anything about any of these devices or anything that we talked about in today's interview. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this interview. Again, I know it's very long, but I wanted this to be long so that it's a one-stop shop to get all your questions answered, because this is something that I wanted to bring to my channel for so long. But I could do all the Googling I want, but I could really only bring you the basics. Like, this is everything that I could ever wanted to bring, and the fact that I have the opportunity to bring that makes me so happy. So I hope you enjoy, and let's go ahead and get into the interview with Laura and Kevin. Hi guys, thank you so much for being willing to do this interview today. I've done a previous introduction for my audience so they know why we're here today, but I wanted to start out with having you both introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for MED-EL, and just share a little bit about you, and so my audience gets to know you and your amazing experience that you had.
Sure. Well, I'll go ahead and kick it off. So my name is Kevin Vukovich. I am the Director of Bone Conduction Systems at MED-EL. I am an audiologist who's worked with implantable hearing technologies for over 26 years. And I'm actually also bilaterally implanted with BONEBRIDGE. I was implanted, end of March will be 3 years for me. And it was simultaneous, so both ears at the same time. And just so you know, my hearing loss is maximum conductive. So that's, and I'm sure we'll get into that later when we discuss candidacy and things like that. But that is one of the different types of hearing loss that does fall into the candidacy range for BONEBRIDGE.
That's awesome. And I think it's so cool too that you yourself are also a recipient. And so I just think that that adds like a whole new level and avenue, especially for my audience who, it's one thing to hear from someone who works for a company and they're like talking about the product and people are like, yeah, like of course they're gonna say all good things about it, but like you yourself are living and using it every day. And so I think that just adds so much value to people who hear your story and what these devices can do for people.
It's true. It's what makes me passionate. It's why I became an audiologist. It's just gives me a unique perspective, and I think truly helps me connect on so many levels. That
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because I know, like, I worked with so many different audiologists, and none of them actually have ever used a device of any kind. So, like, I'm grateful they're there, but I'm sure, like, the patients that you work with, it's just like such an awesome opportunity to connect with someone who gets it, like who truly gets it, because the audiologists only hear from the patient's perspective. They can't add any personal experience. And so like that is just so awesome that you're able to that you use that experience to give back essentially to people that have been in your situation.
Well, thank you. I look forward. It's just something I thoroughly enjoy doing day in and day out. So.
That's awesome. Laura, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm Laura Corcoran. I am a consumer engagement manager with MED-EL. So that means I support our candidates and our recipients in any way that they need. So sometimes it's, helping them research what their options are as they're looking at technology options. And then once they have their technology, making sure that they're comfortable using it and doing the rehab that needs to happen for listening practice. I'm a speech language pathologist and an auditory verbal therapist, and I practiced for 13 years before I joined MED-EL's team in 2020. So I'm super excited to be with you guys today and hear your conversation.
Oh my gosh, we're so glad to have you here, and you wear so many hats, so that it's such a great way that you're able to reach out to recipients and potential recipients to share about what these devices can do for them. And I think it's so awesome that I'm able to bring this to my audience, because I never realized like how unknown this territory is for a lot of people and the technology that's available now. Like people are so familiar with traditional hearing aids, like everyone knows what those are, but the technology that is available today is like absolutely incredible. And when I shared about my upcoming journey with my bone anchored hearing aid, people are like, what is that? Is that a cochlear implant? Like everyone thinks I'm getting a cochlear implant. I'm like, oh my gosh, no, I'm not. Like I promise you. So it just made me realize like how little information is out there about specifically BoneBridge and like bone conduction devices compared to other hearing devices like cochlear implants and traditional hearing aids. And so I wanted to shed light on this and provide a source of education for people. And anytime they're like, what is that? I can direct them to a place of a wealth of knowledge from both of you in your experience with helping other recipients as well. So I wanted to go ahead and start out with the number one question that inspired me to connect with you guys and come up with my wild ideas of doing this interview. And that is, what is the number one difference between bone conduction devices and cochlear implants? Because people seem to think that they are the same thing. And I didn't even know that bone conduction devices existed before my provider brought it up to me, because I only knew of either a hearing aid or cochlear implant. But I knew that I didn't have the type of hearing loss for cochlear implants, so I didn't think there were other options for me until I learned that there are. So, what are some of those main differences between those two devices?
I know it's a great question. As you said, it's the most commonly asked one. And just to look at things on the surface, so to speak, when you see the audio processor, it is hard to tell the difference between a cochlear implant and a bone conduction implant. I guess really the number one thing that sets the two apart is the type of hearing loss. So with the cochlear implant, it is nerve damage or sensory neural hearing loss. Whereas with bone conduction, it's either a conductive hearing loss like I have. You could have a mixed hearing loss, which is conductive and sensory neural, or you could have what's known as SSD or single-sided deafness. And typically the people that qualify for a bone conduction solution with SSD, typically it's because the nerve no longer is viable for intervention with the cochlear implant. So somebody who has SSD, but the nerve is intact and perhaps they haven't gone without amplification for extended period of time, a cochlear implant might be a solution. And that's actually something that MED-EL has had approval for the last few years now, that has really kind of changed the way surgeons and audiologists alike have thought about treating or providing a hearing solution for the SSD population. There's definitely a lot more information, a lot of a growing, shall we say, body of evidence or data out there for the differences and how either bone anchored or cochlear implants can aid the SSD population. But I would say primarily what we see with bone conduction is that mixed and the conductive hearing loss.
When people hear about the conductive hearing loss, some people with conductive hearing loss do use traditional hearing aids. And so the next follow-up to that is, what would you say the differences are between the bone conduction devices and a traditional hearing aid, like as far as like the candidacy and how they work and why someone else may use one over the other? I know I've shared with my audience my reason of why a traditional hearing aid no longer works for me, but I know there could be other scenarios as well.
This is a big question because there's probably as many reasons as there are candidates out there as to why or why not when it comes to hearing aids, or why they would choose to go bone conduction implant as opposed to a traditional hearing aid. I personally wore hearing aids for over 35 years before being implanted. So I was fit with my first hearing aid in junior high. And I will admit, back then, it spent more time in the top of my locker in junior high than it did in my ear, just because, that's what junior high kids do. But about the time I got to college is when I started wearing consistently and truly appreciated what amplification could do for me, because I had that experience as wearing traditional hearing aids and then wearing now bone conduction or BONEBRIDGE for the last almost 3 years. I can say there are significant differences with regard to sound quality because of my type of hearing loss and the damage from all of the scar tissue or the perforation in my eardrum, the hole in my eardrum, the ossicles in my left ear are damaged or broken, and doing surgery really just didn't seem like something I wanted to consider yet again, because I've been through multiple surgeries throughout my life on my ears with tympanoplasties and
I know that route
tubes.
so well.
Yeah, and so many of your audience will, just because this is what we've lived throughout our lives with ear infections and draining ears and perforations and things like that. And all of those things can be reasons why a traditional hearing aid may also not be an option because of the drainage and the constant need to keep the ear ventilated in order for it to heal. So that might be one reason why people might consider a bone anchored solution. The other would be that, such as myself, in talking with my surgeon, we just decided, I've had so many failed surgeries, and there's no real guarantee that doing it yet again was going to fix and not fail again. So, but with this solution, it's pretty much, I mean, knowing the reliability of the product, given that BoneBridge has been available for 10 years around the world, although only approved here or cleared here in the US for almost a little over 3 years now. Knowing that that solution was available and knowing what that could deliver for me in a very comfortable way, it really was game changer, because I no longer am sending the signal from the hearing aid through the hole in my eardrum, through the scar tissue, through the broken bones on my left side. It's going directly into my cochlea through the bones of my skull, which is that bone conduction stimulation, which if you check out YouTube, MED-EL has a video that shows what bone conduction hearing, it's an animation, but it shows how bone conduction hearing works. And I would suggest checking that out, because it really gives a true appreciation for bone conduction hearing as opposed to traditional hearing or hearing with the cochlear implant.
That's awesome. I'll be sure to link that video down in the description for my audience to check out too. I also linked the surgery animation video so people can see how the device is actually implanted, because I think that's so fascinating too. Just how in depth the technology is and what they're able to do with such small devices now. I know that there's actually quite a few different kind of bone conduction devices aside from MED-EL, and they're still seem to be so new. And I know you mentioned that the bone bridge from MED-EL is only 10 years old almost. Why? And so I think that that's definitely a huge part of it. But whenever I see or hear of a news story of someone with a, I guess, untraditional hearing device like a cochlear implant, it's always a cochlear implant. I rarely see or hear people talk about bone conduction devices yet, unless I know of someone who personally who has one. And so, why do you think that there's still such little information about that device specifically compared to traditional hearing aids and or cochlear implants? And that's another reason why I wanted to bring this to my channel and provide a resource and get this out there, because I didn't realize when I started sharing my journey how many people were interested in that, and the fact that maybe this could benefit them too. And I realized there was a lack of information out there for them. And so why do you think that is, and do you think that will change in the future?
I do think we're moving the right direction with regard to education and just simply informing both professionals and candidates and just the general population about bone conduction hearing, whether it's through the implants or other technologies. The last few years, we've seen a growth in people wearing what are known as aftershocks or other bone conduction earphones. And they typically wear them for things like running or activities outside, which rather than a traditional hearing or earphone or earbud, AirPod, those types of things, it actually rests over the ear and transmits the signal through vibratory energy, much like BoneBridge and other bone conduction hearing devices, but it allows for the ear canal to stay open so that those wearing those types of earphones actually have that safety component where they hear what's going on around them in addition to whatever they're listening to through their earphones. So I think as bone conduction hearing devices like those have gone mainstream, I think an awareness to bone conduction hearing devices for those of us with hearing loss will become more well known. Historically, there were some limitations, if you will, to other bone conduction hearing solutions that just due to the design at the time, I mean, it was what was available when they were created. But as innovation and evolution has changed, that's where things like BoneBridge have come to play and come in and really have made a significant difference in the willingness to being implanted, just simply because they provide a more comfortable wearing solution and a solution that really doesn't have the complication rates that the devices historically have had to offer. So I think some of it too is just a hesitancy on the part of others who considered it, but then knew what perhaps the complications rate were with those historic devices. I know for myself, I first considered a bone conduction hearing solution surgical implant back about 13 years ago now. I went and I explored and asked questions, but ultimately decided based on what I knew as an audiologist, what I was comfortable with as a candidate, that those solutions weren't appropriate for me at that time. And that was a very personal decision. I think they would have given me the benefit I needed, but I wasn't ready to make the leap yet. So I think that's a big thing too, was when people are ready to make the jump themselves. And Med-El has an amazing group that Laura is a part of, our consumer engagement team, that really can help answer those questions, set those expectations for what it's like to either go through the surgery or live with this technology, and how it can be incorporated into the daily life. Because I think the fear of the unknown is what keeps people from doing.
Absolutely. And I'll mention this a little later on, but the reason that my surgeon and I decided on the metal bone bridge is like there's so many options out there. So we really had to sit down and think about like what I needed and what my limitations were with receiving a device. So some of the things that were important to me, that were non-negotiable, is that with all the hardware in my spine, that has to be MRI compatible. Because with the spinal cord, we always need to have access to MRI, and so that was really important to us. And then also, as I know you know, Kevin, like with my history of infection, the last thing that I wanted was an opening left in my head that could
Yeah.
leave me at high risk for infection. And even though with other devices besides metal, like those risks are, heightened if patients don't go with the metal bone bridge, like we didn't want any risk like whatsoever of that potential. And so that's how we decided for me and what was important for me. But I think it's also so important for patients to know that like just because one device or one model of a device works for someone else, like doesn't mean that it will work for them. And so I think that like people don't realize, I think they think all hearing devices are the same and they all work the same. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Like hearing loss, like, yeah, we all need to hear, but it's still like so individualized when you're relying on artificial technology to do it for you.
And I think that is spot on, because it's not one size fits all. Each
No.
device has its own perks, but you bring up a valid point with MRI becoming a gold standard, and so many of us needing diagnostic imaging for something at some point in our lives. I mean,
Yeah.
truly moving forward, when you were to ask your audience and your followers if they've ever had an MRI, I would bet the number of hands that just got raised out watching
Yeah.
this video went up, because it's becoming something that truly is part of routine healthcare with the
Yeah.
MRIs. So MRI compatibility is something that people consider. Battery life, comfort, ease of use, things like all of those things come into play when considering which device to get.
We were considering like other devices. It was amazing to me, like still how many of them are not MRI compatible yet, and that people still have devices that are implanted in them that are not MRI compatible. And the fact that I'm so young, like the likelihood of me ever needing one, like is, I would say, pretty high. because I am so young, and we hope that this is a device that I will have lifelong. And so this is a decision that we really had to look into the future with, so that I wouldn't have to undergo this a bunch of times for different hearing devices. And so just that feature alone, I think, is so important for patients to consider when they're considering a hearing device, is looking forward. It's like, what's not even just the present now, like looking forward, what do you think you will need? And we can't predict our own healthcare, but we can only like make the best decisions on what we know with the information that we have. But going along with that, and Laura, you work with like all kinds of recipients and candidates, so maybe you can chime in a little bit here too. But what would you say, like, what are the misconceptions about bone conduction devices? And the reason that I say what are is instead of if there is any, because I know there are some, because most people don't even know about them. They're like, oh, what's that? Like, isn't that just a hearing aid? And I'm like, nope. Like, so I'm sure I just answered that right there. But I know there are some. And so maybe things that patients think they can't do with a device, or just anything that, again, just that fear of the unknown that they may have.
One thing I would say, and Kevin, I'm just going to out you a little bit, is for all hearing technology, whether you're looking at a cochlear implant or you're looking at a bone conduction device, I think people start at the end, and I wish they started in a different place in that journey. People always
can you
want to
elaborate
know,
on that?
Yeah, I will definitely elaborate on that. I think people always want to know, like, well, what about my phone? And like,
Gotta have our phones.
everybody's obsessed with their phones, and like we're in a pandemic while we're filming this, right? Like, I think we've all been more reliant on our phones than ever, and so I get it. But to your point, Michaela, and I think you said this beautifully, like, this is going to be a device that is with you hopefully for decades upon decades upon decades to come. And when you're making that kind of a decision, and a hearing technology decision, I think, is kind of unique. When you get your hip replaced, I don't think the surgeon says, go call these 4 companies and see which hip you want to get.
Yeah.
So it's a weird decision, but when you're making that decision, you need, please, to start with the part that is inside. Inside is what matters. And the reliability, the safety, the MRI compatibility of that internal component is huge. I think in the industry, and Kevin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I have seen in 12, 13 years of being in this field is that things change fast, technology changes fast, and the processors will change every couple of years. The external part that is worn will change. Companies come out with new devices every couple of years. You want to make sure that your internal component is going to be compatible with those new changes. That's where that decision really should be based, not on your cell phone, which goodness knows people change their cell phones like they're changing their outfit, right? So start with the inside, start with what matters. Now, the other thing I'll point out is, Kevin, how are you connected to us right now? How are you hearing this Zoom call right now?
I am using my Samba to go, so I'm not sure if it'll pop. There you
Wow,
go.
that's cool.
Yeah, so I'm wearing my Samba to go, and it's under my sweater, so you're hearing me, and there's no distortion. If I needed to change my program, turn up my volume, turn down my volume, if I was connected to my cell phone, I could answer the phone or hang up from this. Built-in microphone allows me to be connected to my laptop and just do this hands-free. I don't need additional microphone setup or anything like that. Connectivity, it is something that is amazing, and we all like it. We want it, whether or not we need it. That's a very personal thing. To Laura's point, connectivity is, while it seems cool, it shouldn't be the reason why people choose the device they do. I say that just simply because, to Laura's point, like hearing aids, because so many that are watching this have worn hearing aids throughout their lives. We all know every couple of years, a new generation, new feature, a new technology comes out for hearing aids. And then when you go to get your next one, it's not like they're fitting you with something that you had 5 years ago. They're bringing you the new microphones or the new technologies, the new way of hearing with those devices. And that's what really, when you're considering a device, you want that capability to upgrade, or that compatibility to the future, that the headroom, if you will, built in. I'm wearing what's known as the Samba 2 audio processor for BoneBridge. This is the 3rd generation audio processor. Because BoneBridge has been available elsewhere in the world for 10 years, we've now reached our 3rd generation of audio processor. But I also was implanted with the 1st generation implant. Now there's the 2nd generation implant, which you will actually be getting, Michaela, the BCI 602. Even though I was implanted with the last generation implant, I didn't sacrifice anything as far as performance or quality, and I'm still able to take advantage of the technologies that are in the newest generation of audio processor, which...
That's really interesting that you brought that up about like how you have like a different like implant inside, but then you're still able to use the new processor. Because I didn't even honestly think about that. Like, I mean, I know I would assume that like the new processors, like I would be able to put on my old implant, but you don't think about that, and you don't want to be behind on technology, you know, in years to come with these devices and how they change and the compatibility or any upgrades they may do. So I think that's a really great point, and something that like I didn't even think about as a future user that others may think about.
Well, and that's one thing that I say to candidates all the time is like, right now you are a candidate, right? And you're exploring this kind of decision, but eventually you're going to be a Kevin. You're going to be 5 years out or 10 years out from having your surgery. And you need to think about what options are going to be available to you when you are a legacy recipient and not just a candidate, right? It's like the connectivity thing, of course, to Kevin's point, right? Like, there are connectivity options. They are beautiful. They are effective. They're super easy to use. But to make the decision based on that is like buying your house based on like the drapes or the paint color, right? Like, buy your house because it has this really solid, safe foundation that's going to take you forward for decades. That's going to let you move rooms around, your new processor, right? It's going to let you move rooms around, but you're still on that really solid foundation.
I think you mentioned like a few things to me if I had questions on, but would you say there are things that patients think that they can't do with their devices, as far as like, I know one of the things you asked me is like doing my hair, like how do I do my hair with my like device? Like, are there things that patients think that they will be limited on if they have one of these devices implanted?
Truly, the sky's the limit. But if there are activities or interests that you have, if you're somebody that wears a hat consistently, if you wear a bicycle helmet, ride your bike, even wearing glasses, talk with your surgeon about those things before you have surgery so that you can kind of pre-plan. Because at least with BoneBridge, the flexible nature of the implant allows for the surgeon to be strategic about where the processor will ultimately end up sitting on the outside. So if, say, somebody who works in construction or requires headgear for work, like a hard hat, they would want to make their surgeon aware of that before they had surgery so that they can pre-plan and make sure that the hat or the helmet or whatever it is doesn't interfere. You know, given that I was implanted before the pandemic started, and then when the pandemic started, I think we all can relate when we couldn't get our hair cut. And I tend to keep my hair cut short, so I get it cut every 2 weeks. And it was 3 months before I could get a haircut. So let's just say I took to wearing a hat, and I was able to do that, and I was able to do it without compromising the sound quality. I was able to do it comfortably and just simply slip my processor under the baseball cap or whatever I happened to be wearing that day. But because the Samba 2 for the BoneBridge is so low profile that it comfortably fit under there, and I didn't miss a beat. I could still go on with my day. One I'm commonly asked for is bicycle helmets. And while I don't like much, I do have a helmet for when I do. And so I've gone down to the garage and pulled it out and put it on just to make sure to be able to answer the question for candidates. And based on my placement, which is a little bit higher because, as we've said, you know, everybody's different with their anatomy and what their surgery history is and all that. So my implant's set a little bit higher because of my real estate that they had to work with, I'm still able to wear the bike helmet when I need it. So, all of those things come into play. Or my glasses. I had never worn glasses before. So I picked these up on a Monday and had my BONEBRIDGE put in the following Friday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so we took the glasses into the OR with us just to make sure
That's
that
cool. I never even thought about that. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and
Yep.
we've had people do that with helmets too, like athletes or construction workers or like cyclists. We've said, like bring whatever headgear you need into an appointment with your surgeon and like talk about what matters to you. That's totally valid to do.
I think it's an interesting point that you brought up, like to bring up what matters to you, because before my surgeon and I decided on the BONEBRIDGE, we had me try out just like a bone conduction device with the soft band, because obviously like avoiding surgery is always best when you can. At least I think so. But I absolutely hated it to the point where like I would rather not be able to hear as well than wear that thing, because it moves and it squeaks and it makes these horrible sounds when you wear it. And I have friends that the soft band works amazing for them and they love it. But I also wouldn't really be able to wear much makeup with the soft band, because the makeup would get all over the soft band every time I take it on and off, and it absolutely like appearance is something that is important to me, and like I'm all about like not being ashamed of your mobility aids, like whatever that is. But I just did not like the way that I looked with the soft band on my head. So like as silly as that sounds, like I would much rather like compensate with my hearing loss than wear that device. That's how much I did not like it. And so
I think
I think
though,
it's like that's a great example of like knowing what's important to you, because that's what was important to me. And I was like, I'm not gonna do this. Like, no, I don't like it.
along those lines, I think one of the questions we hear a lot is about hair and hairstyles. I think all of us care about how we look, right? And depending on your culture, your hair could be really critical to your sense of identity, right? And so one other thing that I think is important to mention is that, let me back up also. I think we should talk about how these work, just because we're talking about different parts and pieces. So I was going to say two things. A, there's different magnet strength. Your audiologist can work with you and your hairstyle to make sure that you get a magnet that is strong enough that your processor sticks and is comfortable, but not so strong that it's doing any damage to your skin or your scalp. The other misconception that I'll have Kevin talk about a little bit is I think both for cochlear implant and for bone conduction surgeries, people think that it's brain surgery.
Well, I've never heard of that yet, so that's good. Maybe we're getting away from that a little bit.
I hear it a lot. I mean, like they just hear implant and they know it's in your head, and so they don't know what all is happening. So Kevin, especially since we have these little pictures sitting over our head, can you just talk about the different parts of the internal and then maybe how they work with the processor, which is also sitting
even though Kevin was giggling at me when I said that wearing my makeup is important to me. I noticed he was laughing.
No, I mean, we all have our why. We all have our why, and it's it truly, we're all ourselves for a reason, and we embrace what makes us unique. If that's something that needs to be considered, like we were talking about earlier, it's like we all have our reasons for why we choose what we choose. And like with the soft band, as you said, from the sound quality to the fact that it would move and things like that, I mean, it had its limitations, in addition to the sound quality not being the same when what's generating the power is external as opposed to what's generating the power internally. To Laura's question, so right here above my shoulder, my right shoulder, the audio processor is the gray disc, and you'll see that there are a couple just inside and then outside the circle there at the center, there are a couple little black slots. Those are microphones, and that's what captures the sound in the environment around us. And what happens is that audio processor captures that sound and then converts it to a radio frequency. And there's an antenna in there that then transmits that signal across the skin, which And this is where things are different from the historic device. BoneBridge allows for what's known as intact skin. So there's nothing piercing the skin, as you saw or heard about with those historic devices. And what happens is with that intact skin, you have a lower potential for complications post-operatively. And because the signal's actually generated internally now, if this portion just above or just below the processor, that's known as the transducer, and that's the energy gen. So that's now what the surgeon is implanting. And because the energy is being generated and delivered right at the bone, it's more pure and clean than the energy of those old devices that is generated externally. So the gold disc that you see there on the implant that Laura is pointing to, that's the internal antenna. And then the silver disc at the middle with the triangle on it, that is the magnet. You have a magnet in the processor, you have a magnet in the implant, and that's what holds the processor in place where it couples the system. And as Laura mentioned, we have 6 different magnet strengths available for those that perhaps have thicker skin or thicker hair. There's different reasons why people might need a different magnet strength. And we have 6 different options that the audiologist will work with the recipient to determine what's most appropriate. You don't want it to be too strong, but you don't want to be too weak. And then we also have different retention clips, barrettes, and things like that as well to assist. But it's that design that has made BoneBridge so revolutionary in the last 10 years and really kind of changed the bone conduction hearing industry, was the fact that you had the intact skin and then you have what's known as direct drive to bone. So the power is being generated directly at the level of the bone. So it's clean. It's not being dampened or distorted, being passed through the skin. It's being passed across the skin is how I differentiate it, because it's going via radio frequency. So you're maintaining the integrity of the signal that is the environment you're in when you're hearing. Just from my own personal experience, going from hearing aids to the implant itself, it was an eye-opening experience because the sound was cleaner, if that makes any sense, because I wasn't going through the perforation in my eardrum. I wasn't going through scar tissue. I wasn't going through the broken or damaged bone. So I wasn't having to work as hard to hear. With the hearing aids, because of my history and all that, I never liked having ear mold impressions done. So I always waited as long as I had to or I could before I would go in and have new molds made, which meant I had feedback. We do not have feedback with BoneBridge. So therefore, without all of that distortion, without all of that additional sound for my brain to process, I'm not as tired at the end because I'm not having to work as hard to hear to filter out or process out that feedback and all of that is just inherent when you have a poor fitting ear mold for a hearing aid.
Hey, Kevin, would you be willing to just turn your head so that we could see on camera where your processors sit? Yeah, just so people can see. I think they might be curious. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is one of the different color covers that we have.
I think that's the one I picked.
Yeah, the white. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there's several different, and your audiologist or even on the website, we have a swatch book available that'll show all the different options. So the system itself comes with 5 base colors, which typically are traditional, like a kind of a sandy, almost a blonde color, and then a silver to match my hair, more of a brown and black, and I'm drawing a blank on the 5th one. But those are the 5 base colors. And then there are additional options. I bought the green monster and the pirate for Halloween this year, just because I like to have fun with them. Like you were saying, it's just like, embrace it. And that's what I do. I wear fun covers and people ask me questions about my hearing technology. But for those that don't want to stand out and deal with the questions, the processor is low enough profile where it can disappear under hair, or you can get a hair color cover that makes it disappear even if it can't go under the hair. So there's a lot of wearing options out there that are available. To kind of backtrack a second, you asked a question earlier about the things that people don't know that you wish they did. The thing that popped into my head back then was water wear. The ability to swim while wearing the processor is something that you can do. We have what's called the water wear, which,
I saw that. Yeah.
yeah, for lack of a better description, it's like a shower cap for the processor, and it fits snugly over the processor. It does not distort the integrity of the signal. So sound,
That's
even like
incredible.
wearing it at the beach, wearing it in the pool, even if you're not in the water, you don't have to take it off to hear. You can, it's 0.6 grams, so very lightweight, and it allows for you to join your friends at the pool, or even, I mean, if you wanted to shower with your processor on, you could do it. You know,
I'm so afraid I'm gonna forget to take it off. Like, I'm gonna put a big sign and by my shower. Take
yes,
hearing aid processor off, because it's just that extra step that like I'm not used to doing. So getting in new
that
routines takes me a bit. So that's, but I'm glad it's like a big fear of mine, so that it's like in the back of my mind always, hopefully. But I'm just like,
you're
oh my gosh, I can just see it. My first week with this thing, and then I fry it in the shower, and then Laura will get a phone call from me. Laura, I fried my processor in the first week, and I'm irresponsible. I can just see
that
now.
that is the best piece of advice I was ever given. Put a sign on the shower door to remind yourself to take the processor off, because at least for me, without having feedback, without having the pressure and all that, I mean, truly, I forget I'm wearing them.
Yeah, and I think that's
And
where I'm gonna be too. Yeah.
yeah, so put a sign on the shower door. And I will admit, I've done it twice. Now, granted, I caught it just as I was stepping in, because I thought to myself, this shower is pretty loud, you know, and that's when you know, that's when I realized before I put my head under that I still had them on. But you do, that's when you kind of scramble and get them out the door as quickly as you can. But yeah, so putting a sign on the shower door when you're activated, just to remember to take the processors off, is a very, very good piece of advice.
That is so good to know, and hopefully I will be a responsible BoneBridge user. And always remember to take my processor off. When people follow people on social media, they often follow people with similar stories or experiences as them. And so a lot of my followers also have osteogenesis imperfecta. And there are actually very few in my own personal circle of people who have osteogenesis imperfecta, like that have a bone conduction device of any kind. And so I was bombarded with messages from people with OI like, oh my gosh, like, what about our bones? Like, could I get one of these devices? I know, and my surgeon knows from her experience that this is a viable option, but for patients specifically with osteogenesis imperfecta, of course, like, healthcare is so individualized. So this is not a blanket statement to say that this device would work for everyone with OI. But as a whole, can you explain a little bit about Medell's experience with other patients, specifically with osteogenesis imperfecta, and the viability and usability and the safety of having this implanted for them?
As you pointed out, you know, each of us is unique, and even that within the OI population, those with OI, you know, there's, if you will, a spectrum of what the bone density or what the bones would allow. So I think it's a conversation for each individual to have with their doctor. And then, you know, if it turns out that it is a possibility, you know, definitely explore, but going into it with realistic expectations. And the same was true for myself, even as a conductive hearing loss, or those with mixed, or those with SSD, you know, without OI, there's a spectrum of outcomes. And, you know, BoneBridge, there's data out there to show how beneficial the technology is, but you know, there are those, like everything, that perhaps didn't get as great of outcome as others. And so I think it's just going in with realistic expectations for those meetings and those conversations. For, you know, it may be an option, it may not. But you know, Laura kind of made this point earlier too, in the process, that everybody kind of wants to jump in at the end rather than the beginning. And having worked with implantable devices, mostly cochlear implants, for the last 26 or so years. It used to be that when we counseled and talked about outcomes and performance and expectations, we counseled more toward the negative side. And that wasn't to discourage people from doing it, but it was more along the lines of, okay, if we set expectations here and you come in here, everybody wins. But what happens is if what you do is you set expectations here and people come in here, you end up with discipline. And so I think it's just going in with an open mind for what may or may not work and what is right for you as an individual for moving forward with it. And then, because truly, as someone who lives with OI, you know yourself better than anyone. You know what your tolerance is, you know what your threshold is, you know what your patience level is for, it is just like, how much are you willing to commit to this journey? And I think that's where just coming in with realistic expectations, because even though it's not a cochlear implant and perhaps doesn't have the same learning curve that a cochlear implant does, there's still a learning curve to this. And that's mixed, conductive, SSD, OI, whatever. There's the need for oral rehab. There's the need for realistic expectations. And even as an audiologist who wore hearing aids for over 35 years, I didn't know what to expect. I was surprised that I had what's known as an acclimatization period, or a period where I kind of had to learn how to hear again. Because with hearing aids, with feedback and what's known as circuit noise, which when you have power BTEs or behind the ear hearing aids, there's inherently a circuit noise in them it's kind of like the refrigerator running or the fluorescent lights buzzing. There's always kind of something there. Your brain is always working to filter all that stuff out. With BoneBridge, I didn't have any of that. So I had to learn or relearn what quiet was. Like sitting and I would fear that I had left my process because I didn't have some. So you'll see me do this, like reach up and tap to make sure the processors are still there, just because the sound is so different. That's a long-winded way of saying, especially for OI, each individual is unique and different. And you all have learned to advocate for yourselves in so many ways. While it may be something we all want and need as far as the hearing, it may not be something that's for everybody, unfortunately, just simply because of the severity of it. So that's something that each individual has to have with their own surgeon and talk about realistic outcomes and what the potential complications are, because regardless, it's a surgical procedure, and be it hips, knees, ankles, pacemakers, whatever. The reality is any surgery we go through, there's always the potential for complications. And
I would tell people always do a risk versus benefit analysis, and depending on how many benefits and risks there are to you, you decide what risks are more important to you. And I think that that's so important. I guess my main point to bringing that up is I didn't realize like how many people with OI like didn't think that this was an option at all. And so I just wanted them to hear from you guys that there are patients with OI that it has been a possibility. And so not to say that it couldn't be, and these patients wouldn't know until they look more into it, but they can be. And I think that it's also important, as a patient with OI myself, I also want to add, like, get a surgeon who has experience implanting with OI, because because a surgeon knows how to implant one of these bone conduction devices does not mean they know a hoot or a holler about osteogenesis imperfecta or the bone quality or anything. And so not only do people with OI have to consider their options as far as like, is the bone conduction device a viable option for me? Like, is it something I want to consider? But also finding a confident, qualified surgeon who is not only familiar with the device, who's done many of these, but also the OI component of that. And so I'm fortunate that I have access to a surgeon who is a wealth of knowledge in osteogenesis imperfecta and bone conduction devices of all kinds. And so, but I think that people automatically think, well, the most important thing is they know how to put the device in. And with OI, like there's so many things that my surgeon is considering and that we talked about during my pre-op appointment of like details that she thought of that like I didn't even think about. Like she's like, all right, I'm gonna do this and this and this, and then if this doesn't work during the surgery, we're gonna do this to put the device in this way, and just all these things that she's considered because she knows OI so well. And so I think that it's important for bone conduction recipients to potential recipients to think about that and knowing that we kind of have to go that extra step in making this as much of a success as possible.
Your point, Michaela, about like, yes, do all of your research and also find a qualified person. Kevin's whole bone conduction team and the department that I'm at and Med-El, the engagement team, like we'll put an email that you can include. You're welcome to reach out to us if you're interested in this and you aren't sure where to go next. Like don't go to a big box store. You can't get this there. Like let us help you find. This is not at Walmart. Like let us help you find a clinic that is experienced and a team that is experienced with OI or not OI and BONEBRIDGE. So that is one way we can definitely help anybody who's watching.
That's perfect. I will be sure to put that info because that'll be huge for people, I think.
One comment I wanted to make was I think the evolution and the design of the implants is something, and now that we're hearing more about it with OI, it's simply through the design of where we've come with that intact skin solution and direct drive to bone. It's offering perhaps an option that wasn't there or may not have been as available to the OI population because of the design of those previous generations of devices. So I think as we've evolved and innovated with things like BONEBRIDGE, that's probably opened some doors, and that may be why the information wasn't necessarily out there, given that these designs and technologies as intact skin and direct drive to bone have only been here a little over 3 years. So
that's great. I kind of going along my own personal journey that I give you both permission to speak of similarities and my own journey, because I know you guys know more about this like from a medical aspect, but I have shared my journey with hearing loss with my audience and kind of where I started and like where I'm at now and this whole journey with that. And one of the things that I talk about is how, all of the health conditions and disabilities that I have are all visible, but one of them that is not is hearing loss. And my viewers don't see me have conversations with people in a really loud restaurant or in a really busy store, and so they don't see the challenges that I face with hearing loss. And I think as a society we think that if it's not the worst case scenario that we can just compensate with it. And a lot of questions that my viewers have is because I do have perfect hearing on my left but it's nearly gone on my right, like why do I need a bone conduction device when I can hear on one side? And again, kind of going back to, I think as a society, we think if it's not the worst case scenario that we're okay. And I used to be that way until I got to try a traditional hearing aid and I realized how much I was missing out on and just the little things. And so I could go the rest of my life without this device and be okay. But one thing that I also share is that there are so many challenges in my life outside of hearing loss that if there's anything in my life that I can do to make life easier, like I want to do that. And so this is something that I've chosen to do something about. But can you talk a little bit about how these devices can still be important for those with severe or profound single-sided hearing loss, for someone like myself who still does have one fully functioning ear? So people may be confused at like why I'm going through all this to get a device because I'm still, quote, functioning.
Yeah, no, I think it's when we think about ourselves top to bottom, we tend to have pretty much everything: 2 ears, 2 eyes, 2 hands, 2 feet, 2 knees, 2 shoulders. Especially when it comes to eyes, if you just cover one, you realize how much you struggle or depth perception and things like that. So you can kind of simulate. And for those who may be watching that don't have a hearing loss, go ahead and plug one ear and see what it feels like. And then do that in a challenging environment like a restaurant and see what that's like. Because when you do get into those with plates clanging and people talking and music playing and people walking by and distractions visually, it's overwhelming. And then it truly, I think I've said this any number of times over the years, but usually the person with the hearing loss is the last to know, because typically hearing
Yeah, we are.
loss
I can attest to that. I was like, my surgeon had to do a lot of convincing just for me to get a traditional hearing aid, because I was like, I can still hear. Like, I'm okay. I don't, like, someone needs that device more than me. Like, it's fine. Like, I can
Yeah.
still function. I was one of those because I do. I mean, I'm grateful I have one fully functioning ear, because if I didn't, I would not be okay. So, I mean, I guess I'm glad I'm okay, but like, yeah, I had to have a lot of convincing. And I think too, for me, like, because I have so many other pieces of medical equipment in my life, I was like, no, like, not another one to manage. Even though, I mean, it's easy, but it's just another thing to add to my routine. But I am so glad that I did it.
I mean, just being okay can be exhausting. It is just, as I know when I was in junior high, the school of thinking back then was that one ear was enough, and the brain would make up for everything. But that means you have to sit with your better ear, your quote unquote good ear, toward the speaker, or you get preferential seating and you get all these different things. And really, when all you want to do is just kind of blend in and live life, I think it's, while one is good and okay, two is that much better, especially when it comes to hearing or seeing. And especially with hearing, when you have two ears that are relatively balanced, it's much easier to identify where things are coming from, as far as for safety purposes and localization. If you're out and about, people calling your name, people talking to you, even if you're in the house and somebody calls you from another room, you have a pretty good sense of where that sound is coming from when you have two ears that are kind of working together and giving you that summation effect. There's definitely benefit to having both ears functional. Now, depending on what's caused the SSD, it may not be that the bone conduction is stimulating the same side, but is actually transmitting over to the opposite ear. And those are things that each individual can chat with their audiologist about to help with setting those realistic expectations, because that's something too with bone conduction technology that is pretty amazing. But again, it's setting those realistic expectations from the get-go of what we can and can't do, regardless of how good these technologies are. So
I just want to tack on one thing too, which is that BoneBridge and the SAMA 2 are cleared in the US for 12 and up. So even kids age 12 and up. And I think that's important to mention because, to your point, Michaela, right? Like, somebody sees you on Instagram, you're in your quiet house and you're talking and you're very successful, right? And our kids who have one good ear, right, also develop really strong coping skills, and they can fake it till they make it, and they make it, but they're exhausted. And there is research going back 30 years now that shows that kids who have unilateral or asymmetric hearing loss, they're more likely to have huge academic difficulties, need to repeat a grade, have behavior issues in school, need speech and language intervention. I mean, like, there are studies upon studies upon studies that have proven that. And so, like, yes, one good ear is good, but it's not good enough. And I think there are so many folks that I have talked to that have come out the other side of this process and said, oh my gosh, I wish I did it sooner, because they didn't realize how much they were suffering and how exhausted they were and how much harder than everyone else with typical hearing that they have to work to just be okay. Like Kevin said, they wish they had done it sooner because they didn't realize kind of how much they had suffered. So yeah, that's my soapbox for, like, there are technology is a tool, and it's a tool for a reason. We're not out to fix anybody. We're not out to eradicate anything. It's a tool, and it's a tool that can help your overall wellness, not just your how you hear.
It was important for me, like one thing that my surgeon like pointed out to me is like I'm so young, and like my 2 of 3 of my hearing bones are completely gone. Like they are toast. Like they are never coming back, and this is permanent. This is something that I will deal with for the rest of my life. And so just knowing like the permanency of that, and like like why it's not like I'm 8 years old and like am wanting to undergo the surgery for just like maybe 7, 10 more years of hearing. Like I'm so young, and like there's so much that I could be missing out on. And I know from the short time that I was able to use my traditional hearing aid, like it was so incredible. And yeah, it's another device, but like I owned it. Like I loved it. And so kind of going along with that, like for especially like bone conduction devices and just really any hearing devices, like this is something that I like, as you guys said too, like usually the person that like needs it is the last one to know. And I think it's really important for people to think about like when should they consider one of these devices. And I think I have people who older relatives who don't hear well, and they strange to me because they're frustrated by their hearing loss, but yet they don't do anything about it. They don't look into any type of hearing loss, any type of financial program that could help them get these hearing devices. Like I think people think that there's like so many barriers to getting these devices, and for many people that may be the case. But I guess one thing through talking to other people with hearing loss is like it's crazy to me how many people don't do anything about their hearing loss. It has been a long journey for me because I was like essentially like neglected or dismissed by healthcare that led to my hearing loss, and it was so slow and so gradual over such a period of time. And so it's been a long journey too, that I haven't been able to hear normally in about 7 years. I have a different perspective because I've always dealt with medical complexities and wanting to make life as easy for myself as I can, because there are so many barriers that are out of my control. But why do you think there's so many people who don't do anything about their hearing loss? Like when do you think people should consider this? Because man, like I think we all want life to be a little easier, because we're always complaining about how life is hard.
That's the $1,000,000 question. Like why people don't. And I think so there's a couple things. One, if hearing tests were part of an annual physical, I think that would help. If that were a requirement or just a part of the physical that we all go through annually, at least when we reach a certain age. And I've reached that age, but
there's exceptions to us young people.
Kind of go back to that, the last person to know is the person that actually has the hearing loss. I think the masks and the pandemic has been a great eye opener.
It has, I can tell you. Like, I mean, I've known for a lot of years now that I'll never forget the day that I started to know. I don't know, it's just weird, like, because my hearing loss was so slow and gradual. It wasn't like I woke up one morning and I was deaf on one side. Like, that's not how it happened for me. But there was just this one day, I still remember, I'm like, man, like I am having a really hard time hearing. And I mean, this was when we started to kind of notice my hearing loss decrease, but like, or increase, but like not a lot. But I'm like, man, like I'm having a really hard time today. And then that's when, I found my surgeon that I have now, and it's like, you have got some major problems going on.
Another thing that kind of prohibits or prevents is probably the better word, people from moving forward, is the fact that hearing aids aren't typically covered by insurance, unlike glasses. Hearing aids, for a good number of the commercial payers under the insurance plans, aren't covered. So it's an out-of-pocket expense that it's can be very cost prohibitive. And given that average you replace your hearing aids every 3 to 5 years, it can be very expensive. But with BoneBridge implantables, typically insurance will pay for it. I say typically because there are insurance policies that don't. But
I had to fight tooth and nail. Like mine was the first device they've ever covered, implantable.
Yeah.
I like one of the first that they've ever covered. So yeah, I can attest to that.
It's amazing to think, and the thing is, kind of like what we said earlier too, you have to be your own advocate and really beat the drum to get what you want, unfortunately. But what this technology can do and the quality of life improvements it can bring and the ability to bring back social opportunities, your willingness to be out there in those restaurants or in those more challenging environments, because you now have something to assist with the hearing, you're more likely than not going to stop avoiding those challenging situations, or you're going to at least be more willing to put yourself out there again because you find you're not struggling like you used to. I think insurance coverage is part of it. The masks has kind of been an awakening for people. And then over the last few years, with the advent of Bluetooth earphones, I mean, who doesn't see somebody walking around with something sticking out of their ears now? I mean, for years, wearing hearing aids there was a stigma to it, like the big BTEs or CICs. You could see the hearing aids and people didn't want people to know that they had a hearing loss. The problem with that is not seeing something doesn't clue people into the fact that they need to look at you when they're talking, because we all lip read to some degree, whether or not we realize it. I think that's another place
before the whole mask thing, I didn't think I was a lip reader. Like, I really didn't think I was. And then everyone started wearing masks, and I'm like, wow, I really am struggling to hear what people are saying. Like, even for me, knowing I had hearing loss, I do lip read, and now I can't.
That's true for a significant portion of the population, even those with normal hearing. When you get into those challenging environments, you rely on your visual as well as your auditory to kind of fill in those blanks. And when you lose the visual and you have the challenge with the auditory, it really makes things that much worse, or at least makes it much more. I think all of those things kind of tie into it, but knowing that insurance is an option for the surgical intervention, and if the surgical intervention is an option for the type of hearing loss, then perhaps it's something to invest.
You made up so many great points, and I'm just like grateful to have a platform where I can bring this awareness to people. And because I know, like, for my own journey, I'd mentioned this, I'm like, I don't think that bad, and there's always worse, and anything that we can do to make life easier, I think no matter what that is, I think we all want that. And I think knowledge is power. And when my surgeon and I came to the realization that, like, I couldn't wear my traditional hearing aid anymore, I was really heartbroken, because I didn't think that she had any other options to bring to me, because I knew the type of hearing loss that I had would not be helped with a cochlear implant, and that was all that I ever knew. And so when I learned of this, I wanted to learn more about it, and I realized the lack of knowledge out there, the lack of talk of it out there for people with and without OI who use these devices. And I think people should own it, and they should rock it and be proud of that. There's technology out here to make our lives easier. And so I can't thank you guys enough for bringing this knowledge to my audience and your experience to my audience, because I think we're truly bringing something to people that's not out there a lot. And I hope to be a voice for people, and no matter what their hearing loss journey looks like, our five senses are so important to us, and we don't realize that until they're gone. And so we think about, like, the physical aspects of our life so much, but we don't think about, like, the senses of our life. And so thank you guys for taking the time to follow my wild ideas of, like, taking time out of your day to chat with me and educate my audience, because I truly think this will be great for people. Thank you for creating a resource that I can lead my audience to as well. Before we end the interview, I wanted to have a fun question to end off of, and I know that this can be hard because you guys work with patients of all ages, of all, I guess, aspects of life and different experiences. And Kevin, besides your own, what would you say is your favorite, specifically bone-anchored hearing aid success story? And I know, like I said, you guys work with patients of all ages, and so I'm assuming these devices are able to bring things to patients, big milestones maybe that they haven't had before receiving this device, depending on their age. So besides your own, Kevin, because I know my own will be my favorite too. What is your favorite bone anchored hearing aid success story? And I think that, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's so incredible that any patient that works with you, like, you can truly say, I get it. So many healthcare professionals try to show empathy, and they're like, I can't imagine, or like, I understand. It's like, no, you don't. But like, you do, because you lived their story. And so I'm sure you had some really great connections with patients.
Yeah, I do. And before I go there, though, I want to say thank you for being an advocate and for having this audience, because truly it's when we talk about the education and getting the message out there to help others, it's people like you and these things like YouTube or Instagram or Facebook or whatever, the way the world has changed with the internet, that is really helping us spread this message. So thank you for that, because it's people like you that are helping us make a difference in the lives of those with hearing loss. So thank you. It's hard because I do work with so many patients, but I think the ones, just kind of group rather than a specific, but those that have struggled for years, and those that have even had other previous generation of bone conduction implants, but that those, because of the complication rates or the sound quality issues and things like that, seeing them graduate, if you will, or move forward and continue to try and look for solutions and find BONEBRIDGE and realize that this technology is unlike anything that they've been implanted with before. They're not having the complications, that the sound quality is so much better. It's working with those recipients to see that aha moment of, I have finally found that. Those are the patients that are, I mean, I won't say most rewarding, because I love working with everybody, but just knowing that all the struggles, all the surgeries, all the things that so many of us have been through, to finally find that solution that delivers what we've all been looking for, that's what's most rewarding.
Laura, what would you say, like, what are some of those like highlight moments that you've had so far? I know you're kind of new, but I'm sure you've definitely had some already.
Yeah, I echo Kevin. I think anytime you can give somebody back access to their relationships, like that's incredible, because I mean, that's the huge barrier of a hearing loss. If you are a person who is accustomed to listening and talking, right? Like, that is the barrier, is like the limits of how well you can hear impact your communication, which impacts your relationships. I think whenever we can give somebody the ability to hear their grandkids talking in the other room or in the back seat while they drive them, like, that's huge. It's this small thing in the grand scheme of it all, but
it's a big thing.
But it's a big thing that allows you to maintain these relationships or build these relationships. So I think those moments are my favorite. And then I've also had a handful of recipients who either are musicians or are music aficionados, and for them to be able to either play music again and enjoy it more fully and feel more engaged,
that's so cool.
Or to just be able to listen to something that really matters and is a part of them, like, that's huge. It's getting you back to yourself, and I think, like you say all the time, life is worth fighting for, right? And so it's like, it's these little things that are huge things. It's our relationships and our hobbies that give you quality of life.
Yeah, and I think people don't think of like how all these little things like affect our emotional and mental health like so much. People don't think about that if it's not something that they deal with or that they notice on a day-to-day basis, for sure. I can't thank you guys enough for being on this interview and taking time out of your extremely busy schedules. And I will have so many resources linked for my audience from Meta, like so many videos and ways that they can contact you guys if they have any questions. This will bring such awareness, and I'm so grateful that I'm able to use my platform. I'm like so passionate about education like this, because these are things that I wish was available for me when I was on my journey. So it seems like the things that I wish I had are the things that I bring to my audience, because after going through that experience. So thanks for being a wealth of knowledge for my audience.
Well, thanks for being an incredible advocate. You're amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Take care.
So I hope that this interview was so helpful for you guys. Again, I know this video was so long, but I hope it was worth it. I hope that you gained something from this, learned something from this, and it was so incredible to get to talk to them in depth about these things. And pretty much all of these things that they talked about, I was at least somewhat familiar with, being a candidate myself and preparing to be a recipient just days away from when we filmed this interview. I wouldn't be able to explain it as well as they could because, again, I didn't go to school for this. I don't know everything about all the devices. I only know my journey and my story and how it will be beneficial to me. And I know that everyone's situation is so different, so they're able to tailor that knowledge and just give everyone some insight at least to help them along in their journey. Again, MED-EL has given me an email. You guys can send them questions about anything that we talked about in this interview and any of the devices. I hope this interview was helpful. Let me know if you guys would like to see more videos like this in the future, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!